Thank you very much, Steve. And I haven't been a regular attendee at FM Dig. I appreciate the chance to talk here. Um, so I'm John Newhoff with Portage Based Solutions. We're a Claris Platinum partner up in Seattle. And my disclaimer for today is I'm more in the management of the company and less on the development side, but I do dip my fingers in, especially on the server configuration, server management side of things. And so I'm the one that started experimenting with Ubuntu and such on our side. I'm not with a capital N an Ubuntu expert, so I'm going to be showing you, what I did to get an Ubuntu server up and running, which is mostly following along with the documentation. And maybe it's a little bit interesting because we use a mixture of private cloud servers at a private cloud setup we have at a data center in Seattle. And we also use AWS a bit. So for this Ubuntu experimenting, um, I'm using AWS. Um, if anybody has any questions, just pitch into the chat session there. I have a kind of a hard out at 6:45. I have a meeting on Thursday nights that I go to, so I'll be happy to answer questions as we go along if I can. But don't save until the end because I won't be here.
Looks like Larry already has a
Yeah,
question.
sorry. So somebody's raising their hand, Larry. Or maybe that was an accident.
Mistake. It was a mistake.
Okay.
All right.
So I'm going to dive in, share my screen. I'm going to start just by showing from scratch. I have 3 virtual machines, or actually 2 virtual machines already created for different stages of the process of creating stuff on AWS. I've got this Ubuntu final server created that has Claris Server already installed, and I've got Ubuntu up and running on a virtual machine, but with no Claris Server installed yet on it. So I may leapfrog around a little bit if things are going a little bit slow, waiting for things to download or anything. Of course, the nice thing about AWS is you can just save images and spin them up and have new machines doing whatever you want pretty quickly. So I'm going to just start off by launching a brand new instance. And I'm going to call it Ubuntu number 3. And from my image library down here, I'm going to tell AWS that I want an Ubuntu instance. And I'm going to change that from 22.04 to 20.04, which is the version that Claris requires for Claris Platform, Claris Studio, Claris Server. I'm going to leave this other stuff alone. I played around a little bit with using a T2 small instance. If anybody is an expert on how to pick Amazon EC2 instances, good for you. There are, I don't even know these days, hundreds of instance types, and how you try to figure out which one's the right one for your instance, I think is a whole AWS certification. Carlos is requesting to annotate the shared content. I don't know if should I approve this annotation thing that's coming up? Anybody?
I would not.
Okay. So I've found in my little bit of experimenting that I didn't love the performance of Ubuntu on the T2 small instance type, and so I went with a T2 medium, which is I have found a pretty good low end instance type for fiddling around with FileMaker stuff. Of course, the bigger the instance on AWS, the more you're paying per minute and per hour for the virtual machine charges. So the smaller the machine, the cheaper. For security, you can select a key pair to log in with SSH. I picked a key pair that I happen to already have created. I'll go ahead and select that one. And for my purposes here, I left the network settings mostly the way they are. The only thing I did was to select an existing security group because I know I had a security group that had some access settings to it that I wanted. And then for the boot volume, for goofing around here, I picked a 40 gig boot volume. Amazon, we can turn this machine off. So I had my other two virtual machines for playing around with Ubuntu, in particular for this meeting. I had them turned off, stopped, not running for the last week and a half when I wasn't using them, and so I don't incur any EC2 charges for that. But you do continue to incur volume. What Amazon calls elastic block storage, EBS storage. You do continue to accrue that charge even when your virtual machine isn't running. So for the last couple of weeks, I've been accruing the cost of those 40 gig EBS volumes. And when I spin this instance up, which I may or may not do, I'm trying to think if I have any reason to spin it up. I think I probably will not spin it up. I'd be paying for that 40 gigs. It's not very much money for a week or two, but it can add up if you stop a machine and you forget that you're still paying for those volume charges, and you've got a terabyte volume on your EC2 instance. The EBS charges can kind of add up over time, especially if you don't go back and look at your EC2 charges for a year. We've had a client or two do stuff like that. So this summary over here is telling me that I'm about to spin up an Ubuntu 20 instance, T2 medium, and so on. So if I click launch instance, it's going to add this this Ubuntu server to my EC2 instance listing, and it'll take 4 or 5 minutes for the volume to spin up. I don't really need this because I already created an image for myself of the EC2 instances that I created earlier. I already created one for myself that does not have Claris Server installed. And if people haven't already done any of this, or if you're planning to do this, there's a couple of different resources for documentation. Claris just released, I shouldn't say just released, but I guess in December released the first version of the of their white paper on Ubuntu installation. This guy, and I will stick a link to that in the chat session. Anybody wants it? Prior to that white paper coming out, Wim Decor had written wrote a oh, not sure how to stick that in the chat while I've got the screen share going, so I'll share that a little bit later. Wim Decor had wrote a white paper on installing Ubuntu, Claris Server, and Ubuntu on Sliant's website, and I used that to get this to get the first version of Claris Server running. It's a tiny bit out of date now because it walks you through installing. At the time he wrote that white paper, you had to have a GUI up and running in order to log in with your Claris ID, in order to download Claris Server and get everything installed. Claris has improved on that now, so you can do everything from the command line, and you don't need to install the desktop, the GUI desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and log into my my Ubuntu server that doesn't have Claris Server installed, and walk through installing Claris Server on it. I've got a document over here where I've saved some of the command line commands that I know I'm going to need to save myself just a little bit of time. So I'll be going back and forth between this Google Doc that has my saved command line commands in there, and back and forth between that and terminal. So I've also got some of those commands saved in terminal. So for starters, I'm going to try and find my I'm going to go find my IP address for the virtual machine that I'm trying to log into, which is this one here with the 34.220 IP address, which happens to be the one right there. So great. I'm using a key file to log in, and so I'm not getting prompted for a password, which is kind of handy. And so now I'm logged into to my Ubuntu server at Amazon. I don't know if I should pause for a quick second and see if anybody had any Amazon EC2 questions or comments or thoughts about using Amazon for this, or questions.
Yeah, John, I'll jump in with a question.
Sure.
You mentioned the picking of the instance. A little bit of a debate that I've heard in the FileMaker community about one person said, always go by the specifications that come from Claris International. Another person said, I go low to save money and I put on monitors. And I'll confess that I had a client, light usage, and we spun them up, I think it was 3 years ago with an 18 server. Minimum spec was 8. I said, you know what, I'm going to go with 4, see what happens. And I didn't hear a peep, and they saved money.
Yeah.
So I guess my question would be, you said that the performance felt, weak, so you went a little higher. Was that just a gut feel, or was that something that you had some metrics or monitoring stats back on? Thank you.
Sure. It's a good question. I think a lot of the hosting companies that offer FileMaker server hosting are doing the same thing, shaving the specs down. I think some of those really cheap hosting accounts that you can get these days are probably not meeting best practices, recommended specs from Claris. I know all of the instances we have in our private cloud environment meet minimum specs, but when I'm working in AWS, I tend to, especially these days where we use AWS mostly for testing and stuff. I definitely tend to pick the T2 medium, which is 4 gigs and a little bit light on the RAM footprint. My opinion about the performance there was entirely anecdotal. I didn't do any performance testing. I guess I'm trying to think if I could show this. Might be able to show this. Let me open up a. So this is a different server. Well, I don't want to have to track down the password. Never mind. That's an Ubuntu server in our private cloud environment. But the Ubuntu redraws the screen really slow. The GUI desktop on this on the T2 medium and the T2 small AWS instances redraws the screen so slow that I thought that with the GUI installed, the machine had to be starved for resources. And so I bumped up to a T2 medium, mostly to make the GUI more responsive for me to work with the environment. I doubt that it was slowing FileMaker Server down. I suspect I could have stuck with T2 small if I didn't mind putting up with the slow screen redraws in the GUI. And now that I'm not using the GUI, I probably could have gone toward the T2 small for these instances that we're using here. I decided, since I was only going to have them, these instances are only going to exist from the time I created them till I'm done with them after tonight. They will only have existed for a couple of weeks, not even 2 weeks. And then I'll terminate them and they'll be gone. So I made them T2 mediums just to try and help make sure that we didn't have any performance issues while we were doing stuff tonight. I'd like to say I had some really great performance statistics to prove that what the performance was, but it was purely anecdotal.
Yeah, just one quick note on that. The customer actually said to me, "Hey, this is faster than they had been running it out of their office, and they were faster." So that just made me happy. I would obviously not go with a skinny server for a deployment that was making extensive use of server-side resources like WebDirect, or a tremendous amount of PSauce or server-side scripting. But I just I enjoyed saving money for the customer.
Sure.
But I do think it's if you know the rules, which are kind of like the recommended specifications, and you know when to break the rules, that's probably, a good definition to live by. And that's it for me.
And I think real world experience is what rules. If you have the ability to play around with the settings, which one nice thing about Amazon is it makes it super easy to try put an extra couple of gigs of RAM. Well, it's not as easy as if you're managing your own private cloud environment, because you can't go from the instance types restrict you a little bit on the jumps you can make in terms of RAM, but you can experiment and see what works and what doesn't. And so I think experience is the best guide on that anyway.
And John, I was going to just add to that for those that aren't as familiar with Amazon, and I am not certified or any of that on Amazon, that it's very easy to change within an instance family your instant type, so that if you started with small and it was sluggish, you could try a medium or large, but you would have to stay, for example, in the T2 family. I would just say that I've fired a couple of these up recently, and T3 would probably be where you start. It's less expensive than T2 slightly, and it's a little bit higher performance, just a next generation set of chips.
Okay.
But
Good to know. Yeah, in case anybody's curious, I mean, I'm not going to do it right now because you have to shut down the instance to change it. But to go from T2 medium to a T2 large or whatever, all you do is go into one of these screens here and just tell it that you want to change the instance type, and all of a sudden you're at the next instance type up. I will say, anecdotally again, I have had experiences with Amazon where you change the instance type and FileMaker Server has to be reinstalled. I don't know if that's a processor issue, or I don't know what's happening there, but there are situations where I've closed everything down, stopped everything, shut the machine down properly, and then gone in and changed the instance type, and FileMaker Server won't run on the new instance type, and I have to uninstall it and reinstall it to get it running. That's happened to me more than once. I don't know what's going on there, but if you're changing instance types, it's good to, when I do that now, and once again, we don't use Amazon quite as much as we used to, but nowadays, if I'm doing something like that, I would always make sure I did it at a time where if I had to, I had the time to reinstall FileMaker Server. So let's see, I'm logged into my Ubuntu server that does not have Claris Server installed. So I'm going to just go ahead and install Claris Server. And as I mentioned, I've got some of the commands for that already set aside over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is download the Claris Server installer. And I can do that right from the command line with the wget command. It'll take 4 or 5 minutes to download this, so this gives us a second to talk about stuff if anybody has any questions or comments about what we're doing. I was really pleased. We use a managed service provider here in Seattle to manage our private cloud environment, and as I started experimenting with this stuff in AWS, I was really happy when I talked to our managed service provider. They use VMware as well to manage the virtualization, and it was just as easy for him to spin up an Ubuntu instance in our private cloud as it was for me to do it in Amazon. So I had our Amazon Ubuntu server replaced with one in our private cloud in no time. I was quite pleased with that. So poking away here. Trying to think if there's anything interesting I can say while this is downloading. I think the main problem I have with Ubuntu, as I was experimenting with these different things, is just a slight, or more than slight, lack of familiarity with everything. For every little glitch or problem that can occur on Mac or Windows, I generally know how to fix it or know what to do about it. Whereas on Ubuntu, I don't necessarily, and that's what worries me about Ubuntu as our server platform, especially as we use it for, we're not using it yet for any client applications. We're just using it for internal testing and for an internal project. But it does worry me a little bit for when we start having clients use it, that, you know, really we only have one option there, and that's to become more or less, you know, real knowledgeable on Ubuntu. Because if something happens, we don't have the years of knowledge on Windows or Mac to fall back on. I'm curious what other people think about that and about Claris Server only running on Ubuntu. I've had talks about that with people at Claris, and I understand both sides of the issue, and just curious if anybody, this could start a huge long discussion, so I don't want to turn it into a discussion on that. But while we have a couple minutes here, if anybody has any thoughts on that, like Dean, you have your hand up.
Sorry, leftover up. I'll take it down.
Oh, okay.
To be honest with you, I'm not a Linux expert either, but I found it pretty reliable and pretty consistent. And you don't have all the rest of the operating system applications running. So I feel, again, just kind of at arm's length, a little more comfortable that it's a simpler system.
Mm-hmm. So our download's almost done. The next thing I'm going to do is unzip that into a directory called FMS. That goes a lot quicker, and then the actual installation. So it goes pretty quick. Unsupported file. What did I do here? Not sure what I did here. So this is why I decided to have two virtual machines up and running. One that had Claris Server already installed in case I ran across something. I don't know why I'm getting this error here. Oh, I know what I did wrong. I didn't change into my directory that has the actual file. So the Claris Server installer is going to run. One thing to be mildly aware of is it does stop and ask you some questions towards the end here. I actually found the installation went a lot faster and easier when I got rid of the passwords do not match. When Claris released the white paper and got rid of the requirement for the GUI desktop, I actually had fewer problems getting everything installed purely from the command line than I did having to get Chrome installed and the GUI installed. And as soon as I got the GUI installed, I started getting this odd error message about color profiles that I had to go research on the internet to find out what the solution was, because I couldn't click on something in Chrome because this color profile error kept coming up. And so I had a lot fewer problems just going through the command line installations. So I think it's a definitely an improvement that we don't have to do the GUI stuff. And I know security experts really like that, not having the additional potential security flaws of a GUI installation. Just pounding away slowly here. And as soon as this is done, the Claris server installation is more or less finished, and I'm going to switch over to the virtual machine that already has it installed. And there you have it, all done. So I'm going to switch over to the command line installer. Finishes with go ahead and switch over to your browser, and you can log into the admin console on FileMaker Server. So I'm going to switch over to Safari and over to a window that I've already got open to the Claris Server admin console, to the second virtual machine that I have spun up, that has Claris Server already installed. So this is the exact same thing you would see from if I had logged in, if I did choose to log into the admin console on that other machine. The two things that are in place, or two or three things that are in place on this server that are not on that other one at the moment. One is I went ahead and, just to eliminate some errors that would otherwise come up, I went ahead and installed a third-party SSL certificate. I installed our company's wildcard certificate and assigned a host name to this server. So this server, we're going to be accessing. In fact, we are accessing it through the host name lahua.portagebay.com rather than its IP address, and that's going to prevent any SSL errors from causing any glitches along the way. The second thing that I've done in here for the other for the second kind of half of what we're looking at tonight is that I've enabled the data API in the connectors tab here. And lastly, I have uploaded this PBS template file from Claris Pro. And for anybody who's curious about that, I think with the command line access to the Ubuntu server, I could enable an SSH file transfer capability, SFTP, and I could transfer files to and from the server that way. So far, I have not been doing that. With FileMaker's, with Claris Pro's ability to upload the file from within the sharing function right here, I've been using that so far to upload files. I think as we use Claris Server more, that we will probably configure our servers for easy SFTP access, so we can transfer files back and forth without necessarily having to go through that upload to host function. I think that's a bit of an awkward way of doing it if you've got multiple files to transfer, or you want to transfer stuff frequently, or need to transfer stuff frequently, especially if you're doing if you have a development server and a production server and you're trying to manage deployments and all that. I think having to do it through that upload to host thing is not going to be the only way we want to do things anyway. So that brings us kind of to the end of the Claris server installation on Ubuntu and bringing up the admin console. Any questions? Anybody want to talk about that at all for a minute or two? I obviously skipped over some of the harder parts. If you're wiping an old Mac Mini and trying to install Ubuntu on that, or if you're buying an appliance of some sort and you're installing Ubuntu from scratch on that, I skipped over all the hard parts by spinning up a virtual machine with the OS already installed. I think for experimenting purposes, this is a pretty low cost way to do it. These virtual machines on Amazon are pretty cheap, if you keep them spun up just when you're working on them.
And I'll jump in with another question. The topic of backups, true story. two separate customers requested of us that we establish backups where we're pulling the files to two different cloud servers. We countered with, we'll pull it local. We were, pulling to AWS, and we decided to pull local. So we have processes running on the servers, actually on the local machine, that just pull files down off the cloud onto a local establishment. That's one. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. And the other thing is, one of the things that I've seen happen that I studiously avoid is backups running to the boot disk, which, if I don't watch them, have the potential to fill up the boot disk and bring down the server. So if we're building a server, local, we'll deploy the server and the OS on one partition, and we'll have, ideally we might have the files on a different partition and the backups running to another, so that you never ever blow up the boot disk. So I'm just curious, wherever you want to go with the topic of backups in all their details.
Sure. It's certainly, on your second point, I'd certainly agree with you. All of our real servers, all of our private cloud servers are configured that way, with the OS and the application on a relatively small boot drive, and all of the everything else, all the hosted files and everything on a second volume. And we would certainly do the same with Ubuntu. That's the way our one Ubuntu server that we have so far spun up on our private cloud environment. That's how that one's configured as well. For backup, we don't have any production stuff in Claris Server quite yet, and so we haven't started working out what our backup strategy is on the Claris Server. I don't think it will change. I just don't know. We're using on our production servers for offsite backup, we're using a third-party backup provider for that, and I don't know off the top of my head if they have an Ubuntu client. So I'm not sure what we're going to, right off the top of my head, I'm not sure what we're going to do for our offsite backup for that Ubuntu server yet. So
Cool.
that's an unknown for us at the moment. Our general strategy for backup on our Windows servers anyway is we do multi-generational backups to our secondary drive, to our second volume, and we do use FileMaker's progressive backup as well. And then for the most part, we do a once a day offsite backup to that third-party cloud backup provider.
Yeah, that's what we do. The locals are fast, but the remotes are slow to recover, so we do the same thing.
Yeah, our disaster recovery planning, 99% of the disasters are using the local backup. Most of the disasters are somebody accidentally deleted a file, there's some kind of version control problem, stuff like that. We haven't really had any file corruption problems for quite a long time, knock on wood, thankfully. I think FileMaker's really improved the server stability, and we just haven't really had problems like that in quite a while. So the offsite backups, I'd be honest, the only time we use our offsite backups is when we validate them. We've never had a disaster that, knock on wood again, we've never had the proverbial meteor hit our data center. Or much more realistically, we've not had a ransomware attack or a server OS crash so bad that it took out the entire virtual machine. We haven't had anything like that happen to us. So we haven't really had to use our offsite backups. We do validate them on a scheduled regular basis, but that's pretty much the only thing we use our offsite.
When you say you validate them, meaning you do a test recover, or you run validate, or not verify, you check to see that they're.
We do test restores on a scheduled periodic basis.
That's the part that counts.
Yeah.
Making the backup, recovering from the backup is the part that counts.
An untested backup is not a backup. So, okay, so moving along. So now we have our we've got our FileMaker Server, codename Lahua, and it's running our Ubuntu server software. It's got the FileMaker Data API or the Claris Data API enabled, and so we should be able to log into this server from Claris Pro, and we can show that right here. I'm logged into this server. This file called PBS template is this file on Claris Server. So as Claris has been saying, Claris Pro is FileMaker Pro, and so here we are in FileMaker Pro / Claris Pro on Claris Server. And we could go in and define fields and do all the FileMaker-y stuff that we wanted to there. So I'm going to pause in the Claris Server, Claris Pro world for a little bit and switch over to Claris Studio, where I think I have a second set of windows open in Safari. So I've got Claris Platform, Claris Studio open here, and I've got DIGFM open in the next tab over. I cheaped out on my Amazon EC2 instances. They don't have elastic IP addresses assigned. So just on the off chance any IP addresses changed while we were doing stuff, I have our DNS server stuff open over here too. But I don't expect that to happen. That would only happen if we stopped the EC2 instance, which I don't think we'll be doing. So we've got a few projects in Claris Studio here that we've been playing around with. The one that we're going to use is this landscape quote requests one. But before diving into that one, I thought, I don't know how many people have used Claris Studio at all, but I thought I'd start off with just a really quick demonstration of creating a anonymous web form in Claris Studio. So I'm going to click this Create New View button in the upper right-hand corner here and create a new view. I'm going to create a form and Claris is going to give me this camp registration form, which is great. And my session has apparently expired. Error was encountered. Okay, so here's my blank custom web form. And let's say that we're going to collect information on, I don't even know what. I guess we could make it another registration form. I'm going to change the title to registration. It's really quite easy. And if this was all the information I wanted to gather, I could complicate it up just a little bit by perhaps making a field required or changing the field name to something else, or I have some flexibility for doing some different things with it. Claris has been adding new features to this on a weekly basis, so it's a bit of a project to keep up with the quick iterations they're doing. But once you're done creating the custom web form, all you got to do is click share, and now you can give that link to somebody, and you can start collecting data for whatever it is you're wanting to collect data for. So it is remarkably fast. I'm going to go back over here to my landscape requests form. I spent a tiny bit more time on this form, not much, but a tiny bit more time on this. And I put a graphic on it, and it made it look a little bit more like a page that someone might put on their website if they wanted to collect requests for quotes from their website. And once again, this is shared, so if I knew how to get the chat session up, here's the chat session. So if anybody feels like it, they could go to that link and submit a landscape request record. So it is very quick, and as I think it's going to become, it seems to me there's not too many reasons why this wouldn't become the default way we do anonymous web forms from within FileMaker as soon as we start migrating to Claris Pro instead of FileMaker Pro. It's not quite as, it doesn't have some of the sophisticated capabilities of something like .form quite yet, but that's coming quickly, I think. So this is mostly about integrating Claris Studio, Claris Pro, and ultimately FileMaker Pro during, I think what we would probably see as a transitionary phase of unknown length, where we might want to use Claris Studio for this and for other things, but we still have legacy stuff in FileMaker Server, FileMaker Pro, where we'd like to get the data to go into. So I'm going to switch over to Claris Pro, and I've got this template file I threw up on this temporary Ubuntu server. I'm going to go into Manage Database, and I'm going to delete this table occurrence because I want to create that all over again. So this is just standard relationship graph, and I want to put a table from Claris Studio onto the graph here. So I'm going to make a little bit of room here, and I'm going to click the button for creating a new table occurrence. But instead of picking one from this file, I'm going to select the data source as Claris Studio data source. This is just here automatically in Claris Pro. You don't have to do anything. I'm logged into Claris Pro with the same Claris ID as I am logged into Claris Studio. So it knows, Claris knows who I am and what my Claris Studio stuff is. So I don't have to enter any credentials or select any servers or anything. So I was in the Claris Corner session yesterday, and Clay was talking about the use of the term shadow table and ESS plus, I think. And he was pointing out that it's not really ESS that Claris Pro is using to communicate with Claris Studio, that it's really utilizing more the external reference capability between FileMaker files. That's a closer analogy than ESS. But in any case, the term shadow table, I think, is pretty much being used for what we're seeing here, which is a table that doesn't exist in this FileMaker file, but is representing the data that's in Claris Studio. I had deleted my other table occurrence, so I really don't want the 2 on there, so I'm going to get rid of that. Except it didn't get rid of it. There we go. Up until last week, there was a bug in Claris Pro. This migrated for real was a field I created after the fact, after I had started creating my forms in Studio. I wanted something to help keep track of whether or not I had migrated the data from Claris Pro to FileMaker Pro, and so I added this field. And the bug was that showed up as a field called text 5 or number 5 or something like that. It wasn't showing up with the field name I had assigned it. That bug was fixed, and so now the field name is showing up correctly, but it ended up breaking my Claris Connect flow, which led to having to rewrite a bunch of stuff this afternoon. So we'll see how well the rest of this presentation goes on that front. Any questions about looking at the data in Claris Pro? It's pretty simple. Okay, lost my connection here to my landscape quotes table because I deleted the table occurrence. Of course, all my fields. I'm just going to create a new layout, I think. So there's my 11 records that have been entered. And it looks like some people in the session here are putting stuff in because I didn't put these here. So our anonymous web gathering is gathering that data, and it's showing up in Claris Pro without any trouble. That's pretty straightforward and easy. Comments or questions? So I'm going to switch to FileMaker Pro.
It's interesting. The record ID is 192. It's not starting back at 1.
Yeah, I don't know. Not sure what's going on.
Record ID has to do with the records that are created in Studio. So
Yeah.
you have 191 records in other tables.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. I didn't know that. So
That was Beverly. That was interesting. You're saying the record ID, rather the scope of the record ID. It's not per table. It's
No, not in
That's
what
strange.
I found. It's when you create a new table, it starts the numbering at where that record's created.
Okay. That's interesting. Different behavior.
yeah. I think one of the interesting things in starting to work with Claris Studio and Claris Pro is, and I know from listening to stuff that Claris has been talking about, this is stuff they are definitely thinking about. But there is no analog to this in Claris Studio. So how stuff relates together and how you manage data, there is no way to manage it in an organized way like we have with the relationship graph, and it's based on MongoDB, so there's really not exactly a relational structure, and how they're going to convey that to people as people's structures get more complex, I think, is something they're working on. So I'm going to switch to FileMaker Pro for a second. So I've created, this is a different database. This is a copy of a database running on FileMaker Server. This is running in our one of the servers in our private cloud. And I created a table called landscape quotes just to kind of keep things interesting or keep things simple. I'm not sure in a real world environment, I don't know that you would want to mirror the data from Claris Pro and FileMaker Pro, but maybe you would as a transitionary point before you distributed it out to wherever you wanted to put it in the rest of the database. Who knows? So the data that's in here is data that has been copied in from Claris Server to FileMaker Server through Claris Connect in other demonstrations. So the next part here is that connection. Claris Connect doesn't really see any difference between FileMaker Server and Claris Server. So the FileMaker connector, so this guy, where's my connector list? If I create action and I want to do something. This guy here, the FileMaker Server connector, that connects to Claris Server or FileMaker Server. It doesn't care which one you're pointing it at. And what that lets us do is create this flow that I've been playing with here, which is a flow that finds a record in Claris Server in step 2, and then loops through it and creates a record in the table in FileMaker Server in steps 4 and 5. And so that lets you pretty easily sync data between Claris Pro and FileMaker Pro. My understanding is they're going to have a connector for Claris Studio, so that you wouldn't need this leapfrog approach. You'd be able to pull data directly from Claris Studio into FileMaker Server if you wanted to. So what I did here in Claris Connect is I created I didn't have any actions in any databases that were going to trigger the flow. So I just used the timer trigger in Connect to create a trigger running every day at 2 a.m. So the use case maybe being that you've got a workflow where you want the data from the anonymous form data in Claris Studio to get into your FileMaker Server database once a day. Obviously, you could make that frequency different, but for this flow, I did it once a day. My second flow step is doing a simple find in Claris Server. So this flow step is connecting to Claris Server through that landscape layouts, looking for the value in the migrated real field that does not, all the records that do not contain the value 1. So pretty simple find. If I go back over to Claris Pro, of my 11 records here, everything that was entered before this evening pretty much has a 1 in there because they've already been copied over to FileMaker Pro. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4 records in here that do not yet exist in FileMaker Server. So in theory, this flow should find those 5 records. Then I'm doing a repeat step to repeat through the records that are found in that flow step. And then for each record that's found, I'm creating a record in FileMaker Server. So this script step and this script steps 2 and 4, flow steps 2 and 4 are connecting to different servers. Step 2 is connecting to the Claris server. Step 4 is connecting to the FileMaker server. So in that layout, we're using the create record action to create a record in the landscape quotes layout and assign it the first name and last name fields from the results of the find. And then lastly, we're editing a record back in the Claris server table and assigning a value of 1 to the migrated for real field so that the next time this flow runs, it doesn't re-import those records. And before we run that and see if it works, does anybody have any comments or questions on that?
Interesting. And in high volume, how fast does this work? It's like if you were doing tens of thousands of records or something like that.
You know, Claris Server is very fast. Claris Connect is very fast. That said, I have no idea how it would handle tens of thousands of records. I probably wouldn't hesitate to do this running. You know, for me, when I'm thinking about web applications, I'm really trying to think about what is the use case, because I think you can get into trouble if you don't think kind of carefully about what the volume is, what the use case is, and what the volume is, and especially what's the environment that the forms are being filled out in. You know, what's the likely maximum concurrent form submissions? As we've done web stuff in FileMaker Server, that's been an important consideration. You know, are you publishing an anonymous web form that's going to get 1,000 concurrent submissions per second, per minute? You know, what's the realistic limit that you're trying to hit? And then you'd have to, I guess you'd have to do some simulations to simulate the load and see what happens. We haven't done anything with Claris Connect yet that is that kind of volume, so I honestly don't know how it would handle that kind of volume. I do know it's very fast. We've done some flows with Claris Connect where the flow occurs in almost real time, so you're able to create a workflow in a web app that calls data from a FileMaker app through Claris Connect, and the data shows up in your web app in close to real time. So Claris Connect is quite fast, but whether it can handle tens of thousands of submissions, I don't know.
And for the Claris people that are listening, I really like the lightly grade 2 a.m. on the schedule. It would be convenient on some of these commands, like you're sharing with us. These are separate databases that are being operated on that maybe a reference to the database and or layout that's being used for these finds and creates and edits.
Yeah, definitely. There's a few. I definitely agree. There's a few areas in Claris Connect where some nuanced testing would improve things, and just some UI improvements like that based on that testing would be very helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and it's not going to work, but we'll see what happens.
One question I have is on these steps where you said that, some of them were running on Claris Server, someone running on FileMaker Server. How do you know that? Where are you seeing that in the step?
You don't. That's a good, that kind of relates to the other person's question. I can go out of this flow and go to app connections here. And if I've named my app connections properly, then I'll have an idea what's going on. Like I named this one Claris Server PBS template, so I know that app connection is going to Claris Server and the copy of the PBS template file that's on there. But that naming convention is really where you have to hang your hat in terms of keeping track of that. It is a little, if you were doing a lot of really complicated stuff in Connect, you'd have to be careful about your naming conventions for sure.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to click run, and we'll just see what happens. We're now from here on out, we're in the realm of it may or may not work. It worked a week or two ago when I was writing this for a different users group meeting, and then not just prior, starting about 4 o'clock when I started testing things to make sure it was still working, I was running into some problems. So let's see what happens. This will be a good exercise in taking a look at troubleshooting and error reporting in Claris Connect anyway. So it didn't necessarily work. It got an error. Now, Claris Connect is like FileMaker. A find that results in no records found is considered an error, kind of like it is in FileMaker. So this may not be an error. It may just be a normal condition where no records were found that matched my search criteria. That's not going to be the case here because I know it's not working. The field cannot be modified. So I think, you don't get as good error reporting from web tools, generally speaking, as you do from when you're internal to FileMaker, in my opinion. And this is sort of a good example. What field cannot be modified? I can't tell from this what field it's talking about. So going back into our flow, there's really only one in this. It's not a very complex flow. There's only one record that we're attempting to modify. And it's where we're trying to set the value of that migrated field to 1 so that it doesn't get imported again in the future. Before we look at that, I'm going to go back into Claris, into FileMaker Pro and see what we've got over here. And with any luck, do we have any? Well, if any, I guess we didn't get any records from Claris Server. So I thought we would get records from Claris Server. As of late this afternoon when I was testing this, it was working through create record. I was getting my records created in FileMaker Server, but I wasn't getting that one value written back into Claris Server. But as of right now, I'm not getting either one, so it's a bummer. So I'm going to change this from a presentation on getting data on installing Ubuntu server and getting data from Claris Server or Claris Studio into FileMaker Server, and we're switching it to a troubleshooting presentation. This flow did work, and I was getting all the data that was showing up right here, and I was getting it into FileMaker Pro right here. And it's not working right now, and we could spend 5 or 10 minutes here troubleshooting it if people want, or we can stop and do Q&A. Anybody have a preference? Might be that as a group we can debug this fairly quickly. Any opinions on that?
I'd love to see the troubleshooting.
So we'll take a stab at it then. So the way and I'm going to pretend that people haven't used Connect and just talk about it from that standpoint. So the way Connect works here, the find records flow step is everything works off layouts because it's using the FileMaker Data API, which is layout based. So we have to tell it what layout we're going to do the find on, which I've done, and then you have to tell it, what your query is. So I've told it I want to find the value 1 in the migrated for real field, except that I want to do an omit instead of a normal find. Connect uses the results of the query against the data API to build a set of fields that you can then select your data in your query for. So normally you would click this plus field here, this plus button here, and it would let me select field names to do queries on. For some reason, it's not doing that this afternoon for me. Normally what you would do is put your layout name there, tell it to review and test it, and that would build your now I've lost my button. So that would build your your field names into that plus button, and it's not doing it right now for some reason. Now my screen redraw is not even working. So I'm going to assume that flow step is working correctly and move on to this create records one. But I'm going to take a look at the repeat one. So the repeat flow step is taking a list that's returned by the find and looping through the following steps for as many times as as many iterations as the list has in it. So I've told it in this flow step, I've told it using the results of the find record flow step, use the list called this data list here. And so that's telling it to loop through the list of returned, the number of times, the number of records in that JSON block to loop through them for the next flow steps, which are the create and the edit flow steps. Yeah, and now I feel like this is a waste of time because now we're starting to run into some of the difficulties I was having late this afternoon that I can't explain why it's doing this right to me right now. I don't have an explanation for that. We're giving it what we're supposed to give it here, which is the list of the found records, I mean, that's the parameter. So there's something going on here that I'm either doing wrong or I don't have an explanation for this one at the moment. If we have any Connect gurus at the moment that know more than me on this, feel free to pitch in with thoughts on what's going on there.
How do you know that that's failing at that step? Because I thought the error had to do with posting back to the record, to one of these records in step 4 or 5.
That was the problem when I ran the script when I ran the flow in the first place. But now that I'm in the flow and editing it, it's not accepting this as a valid value for the repeat loop. You know what? So when I tell it I want to use this value for my repeat loop, and then I tell it to update, it's telling me that it's a failed or invalid parameter, which it's not. I can discard the changes and we can see what happens. I think we'll be back to the same error. Field cannot be modified. So I think that, well, I actually don't even know. I think it's rejecting my editing. The only field that I'm trying to modify in this whole flow is this one field. So it seems like it's rejecting the assignment of 1 to that field, but I've double checked that field. It's definitely editable. So I apologize. I tried to get this debugged before we met this evening, but something changed between when I was running it last week and this week, and I just didn't have enough time to get it to figure out what changed. One thing that had changed for sure is that this with Claris fixing the bug that caused this field to not be named correctly. This prior to this past week, I had to put number 5 there because the fields coming from Claris Studio weren't coming over with their real name. They were coming over with sort of a generic name. But that was fixed. And so I think my query is working properly. If I delete this last script step, see if our flow works now. So now it's successful in theory. So if it's successful, one would argue that I should be able to go back here and see all that data. So it's successful in the sense that it's creating records. It's not successful in the sense that it's assigning values properly. So my flow is running, it's connecting, it's creating records, but these assignments aren't happening successfully.
Curious, in the flow steps, you know how you just deleted that step and you got it to work again?
Yeah.
I kind of do similar things in just like FileMaker scripting.
Sure.
Like, can you comment out a step so it just doesn't run, just skips over it?
No.
Oh, okay.
Nope. Can't comment. You can't disable / comment out a script. You can comment. Pardon? Does somebody have a?
John, I was just thinking you deleted that table in the diagram. I wonder if that had something to do with how you decided what's assigned to what's being rewritten.
That's a good question. I'm gonna.
Yeah, that I wondered about that too, that maybe it didn't really make the correct
Yeah.
association.
I'm gonna make a guess that the answer to that is no, that shouldn't matter. And I'm gonna say why, and then we'll test it. I don't think it should matter because this is all JSON going through the data API, right? There's no tokenization, there's no real-time connection between Connect and Claris Pro. It's a call to the data API. And so as long as the spelling of the word landscape quotes didn't change, it shouldn't matter because it's just text in a JSON call. It's just the text in the HTML call. So I would argue it shouldn't matter, but
That's a data comment, but you also changed and created a table so the table might have a new ID.
yeah, but we're not using FileMaker IDs. We're using, it's a JSON call in the data into the data API. We're not using any internal FileMaker table IDs here. But in any case, let's go ahead and reselect. I'm going to pick a different layout, and then I'll reselect the landscape quotes layout. And that's in, just trying to mentally make sure I'm doing this correctly. This is in the find records in the Claris server file, so that's correct there. And I'm going to save that. And I didn't make any changes in the FileMaker file, so this shouldn't matter. But just for the fun of it, I'll go ahead and reselect the layout name here as well. And that blanked out my field assignments, so I'm going to go ahead and put my field assignments back in. Oh, I'm doing this wrong. Sorry, I screwed that up. You have to select the data that you want to put in here based on the correct flow step that you want the data from. And I was selecting it as if I wanted the data from this flow step. I don't want the data from that flow step. I want it from the repeat loop through that set of records. So I don't think I did that right. So this is what I want. Does that difference make sense? I'll show it again here. So
Not very much. Thanks.
yeah, I was selecting from flow step 2, and what I really want is flow step 3. And that might have been the bug that might have been I might have done that earlier today because I was rather frantically trying to get this to work. So I may have made that done that bug earlier. So I'm going to run this again. We can run this as many times as we want now because that last step's not there. And so it's going to just re-import this data every time. Success, and with any luck, we'll have actual data here. Yay! Did those look familiar to people? Those the test records some people put in. So now we've got the connect flow is successfully pushing the data from Claris Server, Claris Studio to FileMaker Pro, and the only problem is that we're not setting that migrated value to get it to not re-import it every single night. Now we're using FileMaker, right? So we could do whatever we want on the FileMaker side. We could clean up after ourselves over there if we wanted to. Not that I want to do that, but so I'm going to try one more time, and then I'm actually running late. I'm going to try one more time anyway. So I'm going to select the create record flow. I'm sorry, the edit record flow step. And now it wants to know what server I want to talk to. I want to talk to my PBS tracker FileMaker server. And I want to use the landscape quotes layout I created there. And it wants to know which record I'm trying to modify. So once again, I have to I have to get it from the iteration, not from the find itself. And then I want to set the migrated for real value to 1, which I don't have on here. Server. Oh, I screwed that up. Sorry. Delete that. Server. I screwed that up because it's not the FileMaker server that we want to flag as already having been imported. It's the Claris server that we want to flag as having been imported. Because the migrated for real record, that value does not exist in the FileMaker server. It only exists on the Claris server. So, in theory, if this worked, I'm going to simplify things by doing a delete all records over here. So now we have no records in FileMaker Pro. And in Claris Server, we've got those 4 records that don't have a 1 in that field. So we should get 4 records in FileMaker Pro, and we should get a 1 in each of those 4 records in Claris Pro.
And the version there is the version of the script. So it looks like at the bottom you had 52 twice. So that I don't know I don't know if there's history to be able to look that back up. But
I don't know what that column is, to be honest. What can I modify? So I'm still getting the same glitch. My 1 field's not getting updated. Although I am getting my, oh no, I didn't get my data this time. So something in my script didn't. You know, it's an interesting question right now. If I delete this again and run it, I don't know how transactional this is. If the error was preventing the writes from being committed in FileMaker Pro, which appears to be the case. That's kind of interesting. So the fact that the last script step failed in each iteration of the repeat caused the create record script step not to succeed either, which you could probably view that as a good thing. I don't know if it's worth it to continue trying to get this to work. Try one more time. Anybody have any ideas on what I'm doing wrong?
I noticed that before, that there's 2 record IDs in there. And you're picking the second one this time. You picked the first one last time.
That's very perceptive.
Yeah. Paying attention out here.
That's called a Hail Mary is what that's called. Once again, it's all JSON, right? So that it's the same value in both places. So why should it matter? I don't. This all worked. This is probably the 8th time I've said this. That this whole flow worked nicely 2 weeks ago.
Can you click and drag to resequence? You might put the edit step in front of the create step and see if that changes anything.
I don't know if I haven't tried to do that. That's a good question. Oh, there, I did it. All right, let's try it again. See what happens. Yeah, same error. Well, let's I don't want to belabor this too much. I did want to mention a couple of things that I ran across that caused problems and all this, just in case anybody is wanting to try this and or either for testing or for real life. But some things that cause problems in all this. One is invalid SSL if you don't have legitimate third-party SSL certificates, that can cause difficult to diagnose problems. As we were talking earlier, the error reporting is it's just whatever the FileMaker Data API error reporting is, and sometimes it's not super illuminating. So things that can be tricky to troubleshoot. Like if the data API is simply not turned on, that's you don't get an error message that says the data API isn't turned on. You just get something about no access or something like that. A really handy command to have hanging around is this guy right here. You can type this into any browser window, and if the FileMaker server has the data API enabled, you'll get this response back with some version information about the server and the data API. So that little HTML string is really handy to confirm, yeah, my data API is on. I don't have to troubleshoot that. Obviously, I say obviously, but the FM REST extended privilege set has to be enabled for the permission for the permission group that you're using. So I'm logging in with my Claris ID. If I go into the Claris profile and open up the security settings, there's my Claris ID. If I go into advanced settings and look at the extended privileges, that's got to be on, or I'm not going to be able to log in through Claris Connect into my Claris profile. Once again, you're not going to get an error message that says, hey, the Claris Data API FM REST extended privilege set isn't enabled. You'll just get an authentication failure. This one bit me for quite a while. In Claris Studio, you have this up here, your initials up here. If you haven't extended your account, Claris Connect can't connect to it, nor can any use of the data API using your account. So Claris Connect's just connecting to the data API. So Claris Connect and any other app trying to connect to your data through the data API has to authenticate, and they can't authenticate if you haven't extended your account. So if you've created a Claris ID and you've started playing around with Claris Studio and you start trying to connect to it with Claris Connect, you're going to get an irritating authentication failure, and you're going to have to spend a half an hour tracking down that this exists. And as far as I can tell, I haven't asked Claris yet on this, but as far as I can tell, all this is it just puts tighter password complexity restrictions on your password, so you can't enable data API access with a too simple password. And then the final thing that's worth knowing is that on at least 2 occasions, I was having some difficulties connecting from Claris Connect, and I couldn't come up with a great explanation, and I finally rebooted the Ubuntu server, and after that I was able to connect. So I don't. It's just worth keeping in mind that Claris is working on this stuff every day, and weird stuff happens sometimes. I'm going to call that good. Any questions or comments?
Do you have any quick comments on updates updates either to the server component or Ubuntu. Actually, Ubuntu is pretty straightforward, but
I don't have anything specific. I mean, Claris is updating Claris Studio on a every week to 2-week basis. Every time you log, not every time, but frequently when you log into Claris Studio, the first thing you're going to see is a release notes screen that documents what they've updated since the last time you, or well, with the whatever the last release was that they deployed. So they're revving Claris Studio pretty regularly. That doesn't automatically rev your Claris server install. I've only had to update the Claris server install on our Ubuntu server once so far, and it went smoothly. I didn't have any trouble. I just logged in through the command line and installed the update. I didn't have to uninstall. It was pretty smooth. I don't know if that answers the question.
yeah, that's my biggest concern is whether we can install in place or not. I had heard they were transitioning that way. I just don't know if that's where they're at.
Yeah. And I wasn't as cautious as I would have been if we were hosting production files on that server. I just wanted to get the install done, and I didn't, I stopped service to the files and then followed the documentation, ran the installer, and it all worked fine.
Thanks, John. That was good. We actually got some extra time out of it.
Yeah, I'm not going to be going to my 7 o'clock meeting.
Oh, really? Sorry.
No, that's my fault. I didn't keep an eye on the time. Yeah, that was good. Thanks everyone for listening in. I'm sorry that Connect flow didn't work as designed.
Well, my thought is you're probably going to find out what the problem was later on, right? And then...
Yes, I'm sure I will.
Yeah, so we have like in the community, we have a post where we post this meeting, and we could probably put a follow-up to that there.
Sure.
Because now that you got my curiosity, I was like, well, what was it?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I'm not our Claris Connect expert at our company. I'll get her involved and get her 2 cents worth about what might be going on there.
Oh yeah, even a little short video on that would be great.
Okay. Yeah. And we'll make a note. Guess I don't need to keep screen sharing.
Steve, thanks for the link. I see that there's an update today even on the What's New page. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that just fixed a bug or something.
Yeah.
Nothing big. The big push was last week.
Right.